The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the July 13th Brown Bag Lunch. Today we have Ted Farrington from PepsiCo and Christian Cruz from AndSpace Consulting. And today we're talking about research foresights, the use of strategic foresight methods for ideation and portfolio management. Ted has given this presentation at the IRI Member Summit last year and also has an article in the March-April 2012 Research Technology Management. So welcome, Ted and Christian, and welcome everyone. Ted is Senior Director, PepsiCo Advanced Research, working in the food processing area. He has worked for several consumer products companies and has been active in IRI for many years. Ted holds a BS and MS degree in math and physics from Clarkson University, and an MS in chemical engineering from Caltech, and a PhD in chemical engineering from the University of Maine. Christian Cruz is the principal of AndSpace Consulting, and he has many years of experience in foresight both as a consultant and as the leader of corporate foresight at Pitney Bowes. Christian has an MS in Studies of the Future from the University of Houston Clear Lake, and a BA in English from the College of William and Mary. So welcome, Christian and Ted.
Hello, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. And we'll get started. My name's Ted Farrington. There's a couple other pictures up here on the screen. Keith Henson was my co-leader of the project we're going to talk about. He couldn't make it today. Rocco Papalia was our executive sponsor, and I believe he's going to join us partway through, but he'll be there. I'm here, Ted. Good morning. So Rocco Papalia, who was our executive sponsor, has joined us also. With that, we'll get started. Our main objectives for today, what I'd like to do is give a little more information about the Foresights initiative, not the entire talk from last fall, but in comparison to the paper, elaborate a little bit more on the scenarios in the game. Then we'll move to a Q&A session to cover both the article and the presentation and project. And finally, Christian's going to give a presentation about the upcoming program we're doing for IRI. Back at the November meeting, Martha was nice enough to ask us if we'd be willing to do a Foresights type of project for IRI 75th anniversary. And Christian will talk about what we've planned there. And one of our big objectives is to enlist some folks on the call to work with us. So that's what we hope to accomplish today. The hour's laid out about like this. I'll spend the next 20 or so minutes talking about research foresights and the work we did. Then we'll have 20 minutes of Q&A. Go to Christian to cover the project we're starting for IRI, and that'll include 5 to 10 minutes of Q&A to wrap up the hour. All right? The other thing we'd like to do, and this is a little experimental, is we're going to run some polls, 2 or 3 polls during the course of our webinar. And this first one will actually help Christian and myself with, what depth to go in different parts. But the first poll will be, what's your level of experience with Foresights methods? And I'm going to turn it over to Martha to run this poll, which we plan this should take less than a minute.
Okay, most folks have voted.
Okay. Are you able to display the result?
Yeah, it should be showing. You see your audience view?
Oh, there we are. Very good. Oh, it's new to a lot of folks, and some practitioners and teachers. Okay, very good. That worked really well. We'll have to do the other one. Let's see. I think my screen's back. So I'll get started on the background of our project. Back in 2008, PepsiCo started the 2 longer-range research groups, which quickly ran into the same issues that a lot of other companies who tried to do longer-range research run into. The first one I like to quote the now late Steve Jobs, who said you can't just ask customers what they want and give it to them. By the time you get it built, they'll want something new. What we found was that the time it takes us to solve a breakthrough technical challenge often exceeded our time horizon of what our consumers and customers wanted. The second challenge we had, I like the quote from Henry Ford, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. The answers to the questions we were posing 5 to 10 years out could not be gotten by talking to current consumers, which we are very good at PepsiCo. So the 2 challenges were what projects to work on and how to get this kind of information when you cannot ask current consumers. So what we did, we engaged Christian Cruz of AndSpace Consulting. This is a new territory for us at PepsiCo, and Christian led us through about an 18-month project that went through very structured phases of discovery, extrapolation, integration, and planning that I'll describe briefly today. At the beginning, first of all, I had to pick some questions to focus the work. You can't just start off a project with let's think about the future. So the 2 questions we chose were these. The first one really asks, what will be the drivers of food and beverage consumption 5 to 10 years from now, with a focus on China and maybe Europe. The second question, PepsiCo is trying to have more of a health and wellness agenda, but what will wellness really mean to people 5 to 10 years from now? So those are the questions we posed to try and for our project to get started. And with that, working with Christian, there we go. We designed this process that you're now seeing. Let me see here. There we go. That you're now seeing. And I'm going to go through this pretty quickly up to a certain point. But for the discovery part, we did an internal futures audit to establish what the company's view of the future was. An environmental scan that went looking for weak early signals of possible future trends. Implications wheels are a way to qualitatively move things out into the future. And then we brought in experts for technology forecasting in critical technical areas. Up to this point, the work was independent of which question. Number 1 or number 2. And at this point it split, and we used inductive scenarios to cover the consumption part of the project and participatory futures or an online game to cover the wellness question. Now folks ask why we did that. One thing, we wanted to explore different tools, but we also realized that if you ask people are you going to behave more healthy, eat more healthy, pay more attention to your wellness, basically they lie to you. Everyone says they're going to eat better and then they don't. So if you construct a game correctly, you can pull out the real behavior of the folks. So with that, then we'll move over to portfolio management. So what I'm going to do for the next 12 minutes that I have is very quickly do the first 2 areas of discovery and extrapolation, and then get into the integration phase and show some videos of the 3 scenarios that were more than we could talk about in the paper. So the futures audit, the results of that are shown here after interviewing executives. There's broad consensus of these being 6 key drivers of the future. There should be no surprises. This is to set a baseline against which you play out the weak signals that we'll find next. Going to the weak signals part now, we found hundreds. Had 3 different companies looking for weak signals for us, prioritizing down to 50. But the whole point of this slide really is the white on black, light on black section, which is this is not just a technology scan. Since we wanted to build provocative yet plausible views of the future that were holistic, we had to do the scan in all the STEEP categories: science, technology, economics, environment, and politics. So we really searched in all of those so we could build holistic views of the future. So that's what happened in the discovery phase. That's 6 months of work in about 3 minutes. Extrapolation, we did about a dozen implications wheels like this, where you suspend any debate of the weak signal coming to pass. You say it's going to pass. What would be first, second, third order impacts of it? And this one happens to be do-it-yourself biotechnology. Could play out as do-it-yourself, at-home test kits. Consumers become their own cops as far as testing food and so on. We made 12 implications wheels. The other part of extrapolation was technology forecasting. There were about a dozen technologies that we found that looked very important and relevant to us. 3D food printing being one that's becoming even more popular now. So for this part of the project, we invited in world-recognized experts who spent the day telling us their views of the future and what have to happen for that future to materialize for each of about 12 technologies. That got us through extrapolation. And now in integration, all those are pulled together into these holistic views of the future. Deductive, we did inductive scenarios. Most are more familiar with deductive. In the inductive ones, you let the weak signals and the agreed to trends collide to build systems. Here's an example of one of 12 small systems we built. This one happening to be China's Generation Y growing up, and one of the big things it'll drive will be much more demanding consumers, who want very customized products exactly when they want them. Building an inductive scenario, basically you take multiple there we go. Take multiple small systems like this. This one happened to have 3. There was the China Generation Y, growth of megacities, and embracing downstream innovation. You look for systems that happen to have something in common, like these do. And I'm having a little difficulty with this pointer. There we go. Let me get rid of this guy. There we go. Okay. So what happens then is you have 3 different elements, and you let those collide since they have some elements in common. And this one, for example, we call culture innovation scenario. And what you're watching are, in the mega cities of China, you're going to have very demanding new consumers, and your company might be forced to embrace downstream innovation to meet their needs more than you ever have before. So let's see here. There we go. For each of the scenarios, we have a nice report, 7 or 8 minute video that plays out into the future, and a 1 minute trailer for that video. And that's what I'd like to show for each of these. There's 3 scenarios we made. This is the first one. These will not be perfect because I know the voice isn't perfectly synced over the internet, but I think you'll get the idea.
PepsiCo Zhou revolutionized how the company makes and distributes its products in China. Now she has been asked by PepsiCo to take her message global. Business Week sat down with her to talk about her remarkable story and the power of letting go. Zhou worked with PepsiCo Research and Development Group in China to develop an idea for branded, low-cost, environmentally friendly packaging for a Dabawala network in China. Going beyond the Indian model, it had the advantage of using printed circuits and GPS sensors that were pennies a piece to communicate with the delivery network. The PepsiCo R&D group knew of several new ingredients that could have a positive impact on the health of consumers. Unfortunately, they were blocked due to the high cost of rigorous testing requirements. And so they went to AndSpace Shanghai. AndSpace is an open-source community biohacking lab that educates youth and anyone interested in biology. The Shanghai facility performed crowdsourced testing to help PepsiCo meet the obligations of regulators. And Zhou found success. By 2019, the model was working well in Shanghai. She was granted permission to roll it out in 3 other Chinese cities. But success also brought publicity.
Exactly. Global NGOs swarmed in, raising food safety concerns. The government stepped in to shut it down in early 2019.
Again, it was the PepsiCo R&D group to the rescue. After many late nights, they developed packaging capable of self-testing for spoilage. In 6 months, Zhou was back in business. She is currently working in Purchase, New York, charged with expanding the model to cities around the developing world and even in the U.S. and Europe.
So the question really posed by that scenario is if very demanding customers in mega cities force you to abandon your current supply chain and normal mode of distribution, what would you do? The second scenario, which actually is the one that's in the article, is around supply disruption. It looks at the three systems here: new coalitions from China, food disruptions, and how would countries adapt to those. We'll play that one quickly.
It's 2022, and the world is unrecognizable to our global food manufacturers. Business models and supply systems as we know them no longer apply. China has built extensive infrastructures and business partnerships in countries around the world. The economic impact has left food shortages and governmental collapse, but has also secured China's agricultural capacity for the future. Regions are developing sustainable ways to localize food supplies. Companies have quickly embraced new technologies and strategies to carve new paths for success. Can these new practices continue adapting to such disruptive change?
In the food and beverage industry today, it's a nice marketing advertisement to be able to say you've made your products from locally available materials. The question posed by this one, what would happen if that became an operational necessity? All your research had to go into areas like how to make products that are locally relevant, but you only use locally available materials. The last scenario was in the health and wellness space, and basically this asked the question of what will it be like when we have so much information available in our cells, our products, smart packaging, apps and sensors, that all this information is available, and basically a consumer goes shopping with almost real-time information on what they should be buying for their own health and wellness. And we'll take a look at this one, and that'll take care of the three scenarios, and we'll be almost done.
We can monitor our personal health with embedded biosensors and real-time genetic reporting. RFID and smart product packaging lets the world around us sense and respond to our wants. We've all benefited from our health coach avatars and health hotspot alerts. The smart data system behind it all is known as HealthWell, and it's continuing to evolve on its own accord. Organizations around the world, in the public and private sector alike, have recognized HealthWell's potential. Every day they tap into its infinite resource of information. Our information.
Okay, so that's the third and last of the three views of the future we built from the inductive scenarios. In my entire presentation, this is the money page. And the purpose for all the work is you've created three provocative yet plausible, holistic views of the future. They're not mutually exclusive, they're just different. And then what we did was engage probably well over 100 people in different workshops to go into each of these futures separately and brainstorm new product and services ideas. And with the hope, and it was successful, of finding some that would do well in any of the three futures we envisioned. This whole research Foresights undertaking is really about portfolio management and an approach where projects are evaluated based on their robustness across multiple futures, as opposed to some risk-adjusted number or something. Which ones are going to play out regardless of the futures we were envisioning. That wraps up that part, and I just got a couple slides on the game to say a little more about that. We engaged Institute for the Future on a great project for what we called Make Every Calorie Count. It was a game played across PepsiCo, and teams of 88 each would go into the game and go into one of these cells and compete to come up with the best strategies to address the issues they were put in those cells. The heavy lifting in this project is really shown here. What do you put in the 20 future vignettes? And they were specifically designed to fill this matrix of steep categories across the top and scope across the bottom from myself, my community, my family, my community, and my planet. And all of these became populated. for example, what if your house had so many sensors, your friends knew everything you were doing, your carbon footprint, would that affect your behavior? In technology, would you make use of a set of glasses that blocked from view things you should not be buying? Collaborative consumers, we all see Groupon. How far is that going to go? And the question is, does trust really transfer across those communities? And suppose that in your community, for your own good, certain foods and beverages and other things were outlawed. Would you go? How far would you go to get the things you want? Anyway, there were 20 different future vignettes put into the game, and the players would go in and basically be in the blog like this. They'd submit an idea. It would be put on the blog on the left. If someone in the team liked the idea, they'd elevate it for a vote. And if it got enough votes, it became a win, as shown up here in the upper right. A win would get a chip. The chips got harder to get. Getting all 5 chips on one idea gave you an epic win. And the results are summarized here from that game. It ran for 2 weeks. Really exciting undertaking for us. The main thing from this slide that I like is the map. All the players could see where their teammates were. So the 88 players on a team were scattered all over the world, and several times folks talked to me later about how interesting it was to watch people from all over the world attack the same problem differently. So wrapping up my section for today, just a few of the many conclusions. This approach worked really well for us. The workshop approach engaged a lot of our folks, and that helped at the end. There's some discussions to have around how big, how many people to include. And then post-processing of the scenarios is interesting. Who do you try to put out in those future scenarios to come up with the project? So with that, the next thing you want to do, that's the end of my first 20 minutes, kind of background of the project. We're going to go to the Q&A in just a minute, but we actually have one more poll we'd like to take first. And we were just curious, does your company have a team dedicated to Foresights development inside your own organization? So I'll throw it back to Martha and Michelle for the poll.
Well, so far it looks like we've got about close to 75% voting. We'll give it another moment, and then we'll close it.
Okay.
So there we had 77% of the folks voted.
Oh, that looks like that 40% or so say yes, they actually have dedicated Foresights groups. Very good. Okay, if you just throw it back to me, I'll put up my slide for the for moving to the Q&A session. And this is where we want to open it up to the audience for a question and answer on the project or the article or Foresights in general.
Thanks, Ted. So folks can either do one of two things if they want to verbally ask a question if they have connected by audio. You'll be able to raise your hand to do that. You can also type a question in, but to get started, I'm going to go ahead and ask a question. We have Rocco joining us, and one of the things that I have a curiosity about, and I think Ted would probably have the same. So Rocco, if you can answer, how is this approached by senior management, both in R&D and around PepsiCo?
Well, in the beginning, it was very speculative. I mean, obviously we were familiar with companies like Shell and GE had used these tools, but unlike some of the people who just answered the poll, we did not have a dedicated Foresights organization in the company. And it was the creation of the research teams that really catalyzed the recognized need, is that we were making large investments in creating new technologies that would solve problems that we were anticipating. And everybody felt great about that, and that was not only supported by, but driven by the senior-most leadership of the company. But you very quickly come into the question is like, okay, so what do you do when you consider the complexity of PepsiCo's business, its geographic range, and then now the time horizon that you're attempting to do productive work over? We have no basis on which to choose what to invest in. And so you have many, many ideas. and however many resources you have, they're not sufficient to chase all of them. So we recognized pretty quickly that we needed a stronger basis than just our own judgment to make these kinds of investments. So almost immediately after the creation of the research teams, it became a plank in our strategy as an organization that we would be Foresights-based. And we got agreement with that fairly readily up and down the organization. And then after a few months, this is when Ted and Keith and I huddled up and said, well, if we're going to be Foresights-based, we better figure out how to go get some of these. And that's what kicked the whole the effort off. So basically, Ted and Keith started with a mission to go get Foresights, a small budget, and a blank flip chart.
Great. Well, we have one question here from Ashish Chatterjee from Procter & Gamble, and he asked, have any of these scenarios been validated? For example, have come to pass or past markers that indicate the prediction was on the right track?
Well, this is Ted. I'll start. I think the one on the disruption to differentiation one. You know, a lot of the signs you'd be looking for along the road on the way to that one are coming to pass. More and more countries, I mean, sometimes individuals, actually purchasing or setting up organizations to protect their resources for the future. You know, I mean, China buying tracts of land and water in Africa, North America, South America. That was one of the triggers for that one. Was something was going to happen to force us to have to make products from local sources more. Certainly the healthcare one, you know, the work's a couple of years old now when we got the weak signals, and the whole space of personal monitoring devices may not be moving along quite as fast as we envisioned, but it certainly is. With that, I'll ask Christian or Rocco.
Yeah, I would say, well, first of all, it's an excellent question. I mean, if you're trying to predict scenarios that have plausibility 10 years out, you don't want to just go back into your cave for 10 years and work on solutions that are relevant to that scenario, then come back out. And so part of the work that did not have a chance to get into at the time we have here is you do want to have some checkpoints to say, okay, if that scenario is plausible, what are going to be some of the early indicators that it is emerging? So you can do a reality check on an annual or biannual basis. And if it does not seem to be emerging the way you thought, then you can upgrade to other scenarios that you would then use to adjust your portfolio.
Yeah, this is Christian. I would just add to that portfolio management is an important bit. I mean, humans can't predict the future. And even as much an intense work that was done over the year, the actual future will unfold slightly differently. But we did do a planning module at the end of this that did produce what we would call points of view, which said, okay, given the fact that the future is uncertain, given the fact that there are a number of different scenarios out there, where do we think we can place some bets? And if we're going to place some bets there, what are some signs that we're going to see out in the world that tells us we're on the right track, or if we need to review or change? So over time, we'll revisit those points of view documents and look for some of that validation that you're asking about.
Ashish says thank you. Our next question is from Larry Gala from Georgia Pacific. And Larry, I'm going to unmute you if you want to ask it. It looks like you haven't muted it. He also typed in the question. I'll read it for you. Do you think you are anticipating the future and responding by providing products for the predicted future state, or do you think you are shaping the future by inventing enabling technologies and products? Did you catch that, Ted?
Yes, I did. I think the honest answer is at this point we're probably doing the former. But certainly some of the areas in the three that we talked about, the healthcare and other ones, we could step up and be on the list of organizations that's actually shaping the future, especially the health one, I believe. Right, I'll let others answer. I think we're kind of reacting to what we've seen right now, but I think we can transition to where we're actually forming and shaping that future.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the everything affects everything else to some degree. In the first generation here, if you will, of this exercise and tool we're using, we're responding to what we believe scenarios might be, or at least are plausible. Again, we're not picking one of these scenarios. We're trying to look for portfolio robustness across a number of them. But if PepsiCo or some other company introduces a technology, well, that will then influence other emerging potential technologies that come after that. It will affect society. It could stimulate government activity. And so somewhere down the line, these become interactive. But since we're, as PepsiCo, so close to the beginning of what we're doing here, we're mostly responding to what we're seeing and projecting more than influencing at this stage.
Yeah, and this is Christian. Just from a methodological point, we built inductive scenarios based on systems because systems thinking allows you to look for leverage points. And those are places where a small amount of energy or work imputed in the system creates large amounts of change. So for an individual company, even one as large as PepsiCo, it can be somewhat intimidating to look out in the world on a global scale and find ways to actually influence or create markets. Using systems thinking allows people in workshops to look for some of those leverage points and actually create some belief that that second part of your question can actually occur, which is, wow, where can we as a company actually come into the market and create the kind of change we want to see to benefit us and hopefully our consumers. So that's another major reason we use inductive scenarios for research and innovation groups versus many of you may be familiar with deductive scenario models, which are sort of the 2x2 matrices, which are often used for sort of strategy projects to kind of delimit the risk space. So another reason we're using inductive versus deductive is to help people look at the future and realize that they can actually create change versus just sort of react to it.
Great. So the next question we have from Christian from ADM. Did any of your studies reflect a resource-limited world?
Yeah. Well, so one of the major scenarios was around resource constraints. And what I think was most interesting about that one was the fact that resource constraints would cause political issues. And at the beginning of that scenario, we thought, well, is this really going to happen? And then during writing the scenario, we actually couldn't write it fast enough because if you look at some of the Arab Spring things that were happening, I mean, it started on a food cart in Tunisia, right? So food prices were going through the roof. There were a lot of resource constraints happening while we were writing the scenario. So it was a big part of how that scenario got to be kind of more accepted, I think, organizationally, which was, look, markets aren't rational, and these kinds of supply disruptions, whether you think it's because of climate change or if it's because of political things or it's because of speculators or it's because of population change, these things will continue to happen, and therefore that will impact the strategies in terms of how you as a company go to market.
We have a couple more questions about these scenarios. Andrew asked the question, do the models account for the macroeconomic outlook in the USA and Western Europe, namely the likelihood of an extended debt delivering cycle for the next 20 years?
We did not, I'll let Ted answer this too, anybody. We did not focus the exercise on the United States or Europe. Most of the anticipated growth for the enterprise is in the BRIC countries, of course. And so to the degree that we tailored the inductive scenarios, it was more about Asia. I don't recall that we specifically focused on macroeconomic issues except to the degree that they were emergent trends like the one that Christian was just talking about.
Yeah, this is Christian. I would say yes. The focus was more on Asia. There was some on Europe, mainly from a regulatory side, as Europe being kind of the bellwether for regulatory change in the space. We felt that given the time frame of the scenarios, that it would be the economic cycles were probably something that we didn't have to worry about as much. But as Rocco said, we did focus on Asia, and then also we also had a number of parts of the scenarios where Africa becomes a more major player as African growth starts to catch on. Other than that, no, we did not do significant quantitative forecasts of U.S. and Europe.
Yeah, and the follow-up question to that was really, it was before this question was asked, was the what about the meltdown of global economic systems? So not only was it not necessarily Europe focused, but you didn't necessarily take on global economic focus.
Yes, I wouldn't say in the form of the two questions, the questions of consumption and wellness. But if you go back to the STEEP model where we looked for emerging signals, and as Ted called them, weak signals, of course at that time it was a pretty strong signal, that is where those came into play in shaping the scenarios.
Yeah, and I would add, we did do a bit more work on that sort of China transformation scenario. You know, I don't want to go into too much of it. Some of it's proprietary. We don't want to talk too much. But we did look at some of the downstream economic effects of China transitioning away from a purely manufacturing and to more of a service type of economy. So where necessary, we did kind of dig into the economics, but we didn't do a big macroeconomic project.
Yeah, but in the STEEP construct, one of the E's is the economy.
Yeah, yeah.
So the next question is from Robbie from Procter & Gamble. Is that, are you partnering with international organizations such as the UN, World Health Organization, the FAO, or at the national level to influence health and wellness practices? So maybe out of your realm, but other things that PepsiCo may be doing.
Yeah, I would say not as part of this exercise, but PepsiCo has had a pretty high profile in partnering both, privately and with governments around health and wellness around the world. And there's quite a bit that can go on the internet and see. But PepsiCo is deeply involved in making commitments on the Millennium Goals with the UN. We work very closely with WHO. In fact, some of the key WHO folks have come to PepsiCo and part of the team to help guide the company's strategy in health and wellness. It's something that's a journey that PepsiCo has been on for a better part of a decade at this point, and it's beyond the scope of our ability to address here, but it's quite extensive.
Good. Robbie says thank you. The next question is from William Grossman, and he asked, you mentioned the degree of acceptance of the scenarios within the organization. Do you have any tips for socializing the scenarios into the larger PepsiCo organization?
Well, this is Ted. I'll start off there. In the conclusions I made, one of the conclusions was the challenge of inclusion. How big to make workshops and teams and things like that. And we actually had folks from strategy, marketing, the business, and R&D engaged when we did workshops. So I think the way we did it this time engaged a lot of people along the way from different functions in workshops that were part of the project. What I didn't talk about was we actually had done a very nice deductive scenario exercise the year before this. But it was done more in the fashion of I found someone who would do a nice piece of work for us. We checked in every 2 weeks, and it was presented back to the company. And that's an outstanding piece of work. That's a book on a shelf. So when we did this work with Christian, we went out of our way to engage people, sometimes 40, 50 people from different parts of the company in different workshops. So we designed the project to have frequent touch points with the company. I think that helped a lot.
And I would just add that Ted's kind of famous internally for getting people engaged and getting the news out there in addition to just a portal page and other things. I think the videos were a pretty phenomenal way of getting people engaged in the project, from all over the organization, up and down and across. And in addition, the online game was huge. The ability of a game to engage thousands of employees across the company in a global scale was just huge in terms of transmitting the major elements of what we were trying to do.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Ted and Christian opened the game literally to just about everybody at PepsiCo, which is a lot of folks. And a number of members of the senior management participated in playing the game, including the chairman herself. And so that helped socialize it. But I think from the very beginning, the fact that we had an agreed-to business strategy that said, A, we need foresight, particularly for an immediate need to set a research agenda, and that B, we don't have anyone who's doing that right now, gave us a pretty good license to move forward. And then the way that Ted and Keith and Christian engaged all the other parts of the organization every step of the way through the exercise, and including along the way progress reports and report outs gave people the feeling that they had input and participation. They were able to touch it and own it and influence it. These workshops, we got a lot, real work done. So by the time it was done, it was the product of a lot of people and a lot of organizations at PepsiCo, and it was very well received. The other thing I would point out is that it's become sort of obvious. It was obvious in prospect, but it became even more obvious in retrospect that this is a business strategy tool that we were applying to a research agenda setting need. And the company looked at this to some degree as a pilot of what was to PepsiCo a new technique to think about how to build business strategy. So one of the immediate reactions was, well, we need an organization in the business strategy group to actually take this to a broader potential field of play than only setting a research agenda. So it was very effective.
We have a few more questions, and William says thank you. Philip Armstrong from Air Products asked the question, is PepsiCo doing all its product development work with Research Foresights, or is this just one of the tools toward a total company development portfolio?
I'd say the vast majority of product development work is done using the conventional market research tools that everybody is familiar with. This was primarily used to set the longer-term research agenda. And the issue that Ted brought up at the very beginning by quoting Steve and Jobs is that the research teams are trying to create ingredient processing and packaging technologies that people are going to want 10 years from now. But most market research is based on looking at immediate trends, existing market conditions, competitors, and what consumers say and do today. Nobody can tell us what, and consumers included, what they're going to say and do 10 years from now. And so that was where we recognized the limit of the conventional tools and felt the need to add a tool to the toolbox to help us work in a more grounded way further out in a more speculative future. So today, Foresights is being used to set the research agenda, the product development agenda, which is more on the 1 to 4 year, 3 or 4 year time horizon. We're still using all the same conventional tools that everybody else uses.
Thanks. Robert Marshall from Dell asked a question about weak signals. What would you consider to be enough evidence to regard something as a weak signal? What level of evidence would it take for the weak signal to no longer be considered as such?
Well, this is Christian. That's remarkably specific on a case-by-case basis. But I think in general terms, there is a if you think about the futures audit as a baseline, which is what does everybody already know about the future? So the first thing about the weak signal is it a bit beyond or outside the normal accepted view of the future that qualifies it as something that's unique? And then the question is this a singular event? Is this an ongoing trend? What is the cycle of change? And there's a number of foresight tools that you can use to sort of suss that out. I mean, the simple, if it's a technology, where is it on an S-curve of acceptance and development? If it's a social trend, when is the punctuated equilibrium? When is there enough critical mass? So I think for each particular weak signal, you're going to ask very specific questions. But futurists have a number of tools that we can use to analyze those weak signals, depending on what part of social change is coming from, whether it's a technology change or a social change or a political change or an economic cycle. We can track those in different ways.
And this is Ted. One last comment on that. As a practical matter, we did the audit and took that down to 6 that there were really, really broad consensus in. Then when we did the scan, there were a lot of things in the scan that are fairly strong. They just didn't make the top 6 or 7 list of the audit. So I used the term weak signals for everything in that scan, and that's not really true. A fair number were quite weak, but some you could see coming. They just didn't make the level of consensus we saw in the audit.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Good point, Ted.
Some weak signals are stronger than others.
That's right. Okay, I think we better go back to Christian for his presentation.
Yeah, we had a couple more questions, Ted, but if we have time at the end, we can take them, or perhaps people could follow up with you directly.
Yeah, either way would be fine.
Well, what I can do is talk fast.
Okay.
Because it's been a fascinating discussion, actually. So I'm waiting for the signal that says I have the con, right?
Isn't Ted going to run it for you?
Ted, transfer it over.
There we go.
Okay, so
I thought that was coming from headquarters. There you go.
There we go. Show my screen. And great. Can you guys see a cover screen now that says IRI 2038 overview? Great. So I'll talk very quickly about this. After the presentation, as Ted mentioned, after the presentation at the last IRI meeting, we felt this might be a great project to do for the 75th anniversary for IRI. So you'll see a lot of similar things about what Ted just presented, because it's a similar project in many ways. I'll talk briefly about kind of what our approach is, what the deliverables look like, the process we want to use, and I'll quickly go into each of the phases, and then I'll talk about kind of the touch points with members that we're going to have over the time being, because as even in the Q&A that emerged is something that's very important in these projects. So regarding the approach, first we started with a focus question. As Ted mentioned, the focus question is really important. When you're thinking about the future, you're throwing a rock in the pond, and the farther out you look and the broader the geographic range that you're looking, the ripples get very far away from the source. And what can often happen in foresight projects is you can create these scenarios at the end, and then the organization has a very difficult time connecting that back to what was the strategic reason we looked at the future to begin with. It can be difficult to reincorporate the results. Given that we're looking out 25 years, it's really important that our focus question keeps us on track, so that at the end it does actually help us connect to what we're doing. So the focus question here was, how will developments in technology, business processes, regulations, etc., impact the art and science of research and technology management over the next 25 years? Sub-bullets would be, how will member companies need to adapt to be successful? And then lastly, how can IRI support members to be successful in these very different futures that may pop up? In a similar way to the PepsiCo project, the mode is going to be as interactive as we can make it, with multiple physical and online touch points with IRI members. There's a number of reasons for that, and I think we've talked about them briefly. One is we want to make sure everyone goes along the journey with us. If it's 25 years, hopefully these futures will look very different from today, and so we can't just present them at the end, because people will be kind of shocked and surprised that we went out that far, and they'll discount the plausibility of some of these futures. And then secondly, we want to make sure that each of the that everyone gets deliverables spread out over the project, so that they're participating together with us, and that the deliverables from one stage become the inputs for the next stage. That way, all the work is sort of leveraged together. So some of the major deliverables for the project, obviously an audit that establishes the baseline of what IRI members think now about the future of research and technology management. We're going to be doing lots of presentations and workshops at various IRI meetings over the next year. We want to end up with probably three plausible but provocative holistic views of the future. And that's a tricky line to walk, that provocative but plausible. We're gonna make those, socialize those with final reports, but also with some videos like Ted showed, and then hopefully, if the editorial board likes it, an RTM article at the end of the day. The process that we're going to use is exactly the one that Ted's already outlined. We're going to discover what's going on both internal to IRI members' heads and then some of those weak signals out there in the environment. We're going to extrapolate those, and the extrapolation phase is really important. A lot of companies look around at trends and then they try to build scenarios based on the trends they see now, and as a result, they don't actually get scenarios about the future. They get scenarios about today. So what we want to do is a number of things to extrapolate those weak signals out into the future, so we're really truly building scenarios about the future and not about today. Speaking of scenarios, we want to integrate those forces of change. Another mistake that companies look at, companies do, and organizations do when they look at the future is they'll take an individual trend and base all their strategies around how the individual trends will roll out. The true, from a company perspective, the true competitive advantage happens when you take advantage of those changes that happen when these trends collide together and create new emergent change. And for organizations, oftentimes it's these emergent change that actually influences their members and their policies more than anything else. So it's not enough just to look at individual trends. We have to bang them together and see how they're going to influence each other to create some of these holistic, different new markets in the future. And lastly, we're gonna do some planning. We're gonna have a session where we're gonna have IRI and member companies. How are they going to adapt to these futures and serve their members and their customers? So I'm going fast. So if you think about the discovery phase really has the futures audit, which Ted talked about. And again, the goal is to establish a baseline for the existing beliefs and shared mental model that we have within IRI. We've done more than 6 interviews, actually. I did a few more yesterday, so the current progress is fantastic. The list of interviewees is amazing. Some of you are on the call today. We want a goal of 30 or 40, if at all possible, and at the end of that, we'll have a final report that documents the major common beliefs about the future that IRI members have. To complement that, we'll do a trends and weak signals report that says, okay, if that's whatever the accepted belief, here's a bunch of other things that could be happening and that will increase, we think, in impact over time and become potentially major trends in themselves over the next 25 years. We'll also have a report on that, hopefully at the end of August. In addition, we're going to do a 25-year retrospective. So some of you have probably been accosted by Ted and sort of saying, what are some changes you've seen over the last 25 years? We're also asking that in all of the interviews that we're doing for the futures audit. In addition, Ted's digitizing all of the RTM journals for the last 25 years, and we're doing some word frequency analysis on that, and then also some analysis of the research on research projects topics over time. And this will provide some context. If you want to look forward, you also have to look back to kind of give you a view of what is really changing, what are some things that are still staying the same. We're seeing a lot of interest around what things may not change about research in addition to what things will change. So quick time for a poll if we have a couple minutes, if we have another minute. Do you guys mind? Do I need to send my control over to you to do this poll, or can you just do it?
No, we're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So which of these 3 factors have changed R&D management the most? And you'll see the poll pop up in a second.
Folks are still voting.
Okay.
Got about 65% so far. All right. Make your last selections and we'll close. Here we go. This is about 83% voted.
Great. Internet, open innovation, emergence of BRICS. Great. Interesting. So I've only got like 3 minutes left, so I'm going to talk fast. I already am talking fast. Those that know me know that I talk fast anyway, so I'll try to talk as fast as I can to get us done on time. In the extrapolation phase, we're going to be taking advantage of the October member meeting, and we're going to have a number of expert panels on some of the potential topics that we're starting to see: the role of simulation, the future of robotics and automation in lab settings, and also the kind of the immersive new communication technologies that are arriving. These might be some of the topics we're looking for. Member company representatives are preferred, so if any of you are on the phone and your company is an expert or a leader in this space or has somebody that can come and talk, please let us know, because we'd love to have IRI members be the ones that are telling us about the future, if at all possible, because you guys have a unique and direct view. In addition, on the next day, on October 18th, we're going to do implications wheels, and Ted showed you some versions of those. They're brainstorming first, second, and third order impacts of some of these technologies. Key here is that this is the last morning of the member meeting, and I know a lot of you fly out. So if you haven't made your plane tickets yet, please stick around and participate in the morning for those, because the more people we have, the richer the conversation. Lastly, we'll start working on structuring the online game that we'll go ahead and kick off in January of the following year. So that's kind of extrapolation. And then if we think about integration, again, this is the meat of the project. This is really putting together everything into these plausible points of view. We're going to use inductive scenarios to do that. We're going to take advantage of the February IRI Research on Research meeting to get a few of you to participate in creating the logics for the different scenarios. We'll probably use some systems thinking to create those logics. And then a small team will go off and do a bunch of work, and then we'll present those scenarios in May. Now, at the May annual meeting, we'll also be doing some backcasting. For those of you that don't know, backcasting is how NASA got to the moon, and it basically says, okay, you start with a vision in mind, and then you work backwards. So for NASA's case, it was January 1st, 1970. They said, it's January 1st, 1970. We're on the moon. How'd we get there? Okay, well, we got out of a lander. Okay, well, we need to build a lander. The lander came from an orbiter. We need an orbiter. The orbiter crossed a bunch of space. Okay, well, we need life support. So they were able to build the steps that they needed in the time frame that they needed over the next 10 years to get to the moon by starting at the end and going backwards. So we'll do some of that in May. And then we'll also, in that integration phase, do the online game. And this is another space where all of you can be helpful, because if you can recommend folks inside your organization that we can reach out to play the game, that'd be great. The more people we have in the game, the better. And we also want it global in reach. We'll probably have it take 1 to 2 weeks at the most, so it's not going to be a huge productivity killer for your company. Most people were participating at midnight and at weird times anyway. The last stage is really about planning, and this is mostly in the October timeframe at the meeting. We'll do, first of all, part of planning is just disseminating all the research, and so we'll be doing the multimedia scenarios, and we'll be presenting the game results. We'll do that face-to-face. We'll also do that. We'll have written scenarios and videos that you can download, and then hopefully, again, another article in RTM. And then at that October meeting, we're going to engage members in thinking about a bit about what does this mean for IRI, and then also for member companies in terms of how do they need to adapt, given the backcasting that was done earlier. Just last slide here. I know we're right at the end, so I just wanted to say that there are a lot of touch points with IRI members. Please take advantage of all of them. The more of you that are participating, the better this gets. We've got interviews for the Futures Audit. We have expert interviews on emerging technologies. So again, if your company has expertise in certain fields, we'd love to talk to some of your experts. A number of face-to-face workshops, taking advantage of the IRI meetings, the online game, which I think is going to be a great way to get to a lot of people. And then we may do additional webinars over the next year if it's requested. And then here's how you can get a hold of us, and I'm sure you can talk to the IRI folks to get a hold of us as well. Do we have time for a question or two?
I think we're out of time, and I think Michelle is going to just do the final wrap and say when to connect with us next.
Okay.
Thanks, Christian. Thanks, Ted. Christian, you did a great job of highlighting the Member Summit, so I just want to remind people that the registration is open. The Member Summit is October 15th through the 18th in Indianapolis. Revving up R&D is the theme. And make sure, again, to stay for the end so you can participate more in the Futures Project and learn what's going on. Also, for those of you on the phone, you can participate right now with the audit. We welcome you to do that. And a few other housekeeping items. The fall network meeting registration is open as well, and that will be held September 11th through the 14th in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And non-members on the phone interested in Research Technology Management, our journal, we welcome you to subscribe. If you enjoyed the Research Foresights article, you'll find much more that you'll enjoy as well. So thank you, everyone. The next brown bag will be August 3rd, and we will talk about GE's collaboration model. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ted. Thanks, Rocco.